Time being 7 o'clock, I call the September 11th, 2024 meeting of the Joint Budget Subcommittee to order. Before we get started, I want to take the opportunity to thank the Senior Center for hosting a very moving 9/11 remembrance ceremony this morning. And I think it's only appropriate to begin tonight's meeting with a moment of silence in memory of those who lost their lives as a result of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attack. Please pause for a moment of silence. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just a couple of quick announcements from the chair. Councilor Frangillo and school committee member Paul Griffith are on Zoom this evening. I know Councilor Frangillo is going to try and get here. He's coming from the airport, but they are both on Zoom and are able to participate. Note to all residents, all citizens are welcome to attend public meetings in person. To view the live meeting remotely, citizens are encouraged to watch the live stream on the Franklin Town Hall TV YouTube channel or the live broadcast on Comcast Channel 9 and Verizon Channel 29. Meetings are also archived by Franklin TV on the Franklin Town Hall TV YouTube channel and shown on repeat on Comcast Channel 9 and Verizon Channel 29 for those who missed the live meetings. To listen to the meeting remotely, citizens may call in using the number 929-205-6099. This will not permit participation in the meeting. To participate in the meeting remotely, citizens are able to join a Zoom webinar using Zoom webinar ID number 828-5624-1053, and then you need to hit the pound sign. Once again, the webinar ID is 828-5624-1053 pound. Any participants who wish to speak during the webinar must enter their full name and email address when joining the webinar. All participants will be automatically muted upon joining the webinar. In order to speak, participants who have entered full name and email address will need to select the raise hand function to request to be unmuted. All speakers will be required to state their full name and street address before commenting. Okay. Before we get started this evening, I have a couple of remarks that I would like to speak about and as to the process, and just to set the expectation and goals for tonight's meeting. As you can see from tonight's agenda, we're going to start from square one, or appropriately today, ground zero. We are going to start at the very beginning. I think it's very important we walk through the budget process together and collectively through the budget cycle, all on the same page with the professional staff. I am aware that some in the community desire to make firm decisions this evening, but I don't see that happening this evening or in the very near future for many reasons that will likely be discussed tonight. The goal for tonight's meeting will be for everyone throughout the community to gain perspective into the budget development system that our town and school staff work within, from scratch. I am hopeful this approach will enlighten and educate those who are interested in making the best community decisions possible as we move forward. As I'm sure everyone will understand, patience, focus, and positivity must be elements we are all committed to as this process unfolds. As a community, we must stay patient while the budget process evolves throughout the year. We will not have workable numbers until early in 2026. We must be focused to make sure, 25. We must be focused to make sure we are mindful of the meeting lengths, staff bandwidth, and staying on the issues at hand. And we must be positive to maintain a civil and productive dialogue, as well as channeling our inner Franklin pride, which we all have. Many of us throughout the community are heartbroken about the failed override in June. But we also need to regroup and acknowledge the tremendous success and progress that was made this past year and build upon that, not tear it down. With barely 40 days' notice, a whopping 45% turnout at a special election is extraordinary, which tells me people are alert and are engaged in town business, which is a great thing. The override loss was by only 1% of the vote of 11,400 votes cast, which tells me there is still very strong support for public education in Franklin. But the outcome also told me voters wanted some more time and engagement in education. Franklin Public Schools received their largest one-year increases in history at $5.4 million, nearly double any previous or on-year increases, and were able to restore and protect a significant amount of the proposed service cuts to the schools. And perhaps most importantly, we have evoked a network of new families who are becoming engaged and informed of the town budget, whether for an override or not. Unfortunately, losing elections is just a part of this business. But how we respond to this loss is even more important. I don't believe that advocating to cut municipal departments or services is a winning formula or a good idea. This will only create division. Rather, let's take this opportunity to connect, listen, and engage on the range of financial issues facing our great community. I truly believe an override can pass in town, and one is sorely needed to support all departments. As Jamie has already illustrated, the town will be facing a structural deficit of $3 million out of the gate. Regardless of what assumptions you make at this point in the year, however, we must be positive, constructive, and supportive of one another. We are starting the budget process earlier than we have ever, and will continue to set up joint budget subcommittee meetings as needed. A second meeting is scheduled on October 23rd, and then we will evaluate if more meetings are necessary prior to the governor putting out her budget, which won't be till the end of January. On behalf of the town council, we're thrilled at the level of engagement in the community this past year. As a lifelong Franklinite, I've volunteered for well over 40 years in this community, and this past year was one of the highest levels of resident participation I've ever seen. So thank you. We are all very lucky to call Franklin home. Finally, a special thank you to both Superintendent of Schools Lucas Jaguar and Town Administrator Jamie Helen for their continued incredible leadership in this community, as well as the entire town and school staff, as we have so many dedicated people working for the town. We will need to lean heavily on their leadership, knowledge, and advice. And with that very short statement, I'd like to turn it over to Jamie for a few quick remarks, then we'll go to Lucas, then we'll go to Dave McNeil from the school committee. So Jamie.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I'll save most of the time right now for any questions later on. I'm sure a lot of folks have some questions about the items on the agenda. The good news is I was with the Secretary of A&F the other day, and we were remorsing, we're already on a week after Labor Day meeting about the budget. And Lucas and I have met a few times over the summer, on some big picture ideas, and certainly I can safely say that we're all on the same page as we come out to try to deal with the FY26 budget. As everybody remembers, we have bi-weekly meetings among the admin on school in town. Those meetings have been very productive to make sure our communication is excellent. And so when we came in after kind of a 4-week break or so, we both had a list of what we wanted to try to accomplish at this first meeting, and our lists were exactly the same. So just so the public and the board knows, the superintendent and I are on the same page going into budget season. Really quickly, I just want to acknowledge one thing. If folks, as we get back into school season, there's been a ton of articles in the newspapers statewide, and I understand there's been some about issues around busing and whatnot, which is not my focus, but if folks look at WBUR, they had an article come out a couple weeks ago, or a week or so ago, titled "Why Massachusetts Schools Are Having an Extremely Difficult Financial Year." People may have seen earlier in the summer a Boston Globe article by Jamie Vastis that registered well over 100 overrides in Massachusetts over the last 18 months. And then there was an article just recently again in the Globe about declining enrollment and the challenges in the competition among schools across Massachusetts. In the city of Newton, for example, in a city of over 100,000 people, over almost a quarter of the children in the city of Newton go to parochial private schools, and certainly that doesn't even include charter schools or some of the other schools that may be there. The town of Amherst announced today, I happen to see on the master list, they're having 4 budget meetings like this with their council, finance committee, and school committee member, and they're having their first meeting this week as well. Why do I point all this out? I think it's incredibly important to be able to see a little bit of the forest from the trees and be able to make sure that everybody really understands that the troubles and difficulties we're seeing both on the school finance end, but also the town-wide budget. This is not unique to Franklin at all. In fact, this is an issue facing all of Eastern Massachusetts significantly. When you're talking about over 100 to 110 overrides in an 18-month period, that is an enormous amount of overrides historically when you look at those trends. We all know why. Massachusetts values its public services and its public schools. And as we've heard from a lot of citizens, just like in every other community, they're concerned about a lot of the trends that we're seeing. But I do think it's really important, I just happened to notice this as I was getting ready for the meeting this week, that every community, the managers that I talk to in my managers groups with Amy, and I'm sure Lucas is in the same boat, and the mayors that I interact with, in between at the lunch table, this is the only topic people are talking about, is talking about local finance. I was fortunate enough yesterday to have, on the local government advisory committee at the MMA level, I was fortunate enough to sit next to the Secretary of A&F for an hour and a half, as well as our Lieutenant Governor, Kim Driscoll. And after the meeting was over, they were gracious enough to talk a little bit about municipal finance. I had actually had the speaking role about thanking them for the minimum aid increases that we had seen this year, which was huge, and made a passionate plea to them, both publicly in front of all of our colleagues, in front of the press and others, it's just how important investments in education are going to be going into FY26, into the state budget process later this year, which I know we'll talk about later. And I just want everybody to know, even from the Lieutenant Governor herself, she is very much aware of what's going on in a lot of our communities. She engaged me for a good 10 or 15 minutes to talk about the Franklin example and what happened with the override in June. She is hearing very similar messages everywhere she goes from local officials on school committees, councils, boards of select boards, and other local officials. So I do think it's important for everybody to understand that the situation we're facing here in Franklin is by far not unique. In fact, this is actually sadly the norm. We are not the exception. And so I think as we go into budget season, I hope folks keep some of those points in mind. And as, of course, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to answering everybody's questions this evening and throughout the budget season, as I've met with a lot of parents and stakeholders and seniors and citizens throughout the summer. I do think that there is an appetite in this community to have a very thorough engagement process and to listen to our residents here about what their feelings are on a myriad of financial issues throughout town. So appreciate the few minutes, and I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Okay, I'll move to Lucas for
Thank
some
you.
opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone. Just as we engage in this forum, this budget development process, I think, when I think back a year ago, and the Joint Budget Subcommittee over the summer began, that was new territory because of just newer issues, not new to the town as far as a system, but bringing three bodies together to kind of put eyes on our budget development process. And I think now, a year later, what we've experienced, we come back to the table. I think it's a really good strategy to start from ground zero or from the bottom to kind of, and I know that will be part of the meeting, but I also think we all carry with us our experiences throughout last year. What was successful, what wasn't, what worked, what didn't. If we are truly going to solve, and I think we're not unique, as Jamie said, but as a town, every town is responsible to help solve their own problems. And I think what I am just saying is, as we've lived through the year we did, and here we are again, starting really early with this, it's really about how do we work together to help ourselves. I wanted to also just say our goal through this process for the schools is to be as transparent as possible with our budget. We are in the process. We made some decisions to reorganize as a district. So we are literally rebuilding schools from the ground up, and that is new. It's not a rinse and repeat because we need to now look at things through a different lens. But I want to just really re-emphasize to everyone, any type of school reorganization is not going to solve the fiscal issues that we're facing within town. We set ourselves up to create a more sustainable system, but certainly the work that we do through our teams, through the work at this committee is vital to making sure that we're adequately supporting all the services that we have come to expect in town and what we hope for our children. Next year's plan is representative of this year's budget that we'll go through, the budget cycle that we'll propose. We are thinking about what are we prioritizing for our initiatives, identifying the drivers that are within our control and out of our control, and we'll hear more about that from Mr. Helen about some of the modeling that he's put forth. And also any potential economies of scale issues, but I just want to reemphasize, we need to be thinking about all of these factors in combination with the bigger picture of not just schools, but town and our fiscal situation. The last piece I would just say is there are many steps as we move through this process, and as a school system, we're committed to being as transparent as possible, and I'm hopeful that there's, between the three bodies, there's some real engaged conversations and ability to work together as we need to solve this together, and I think we need to be on the same page.
Thank you, Lucas. Dave McNeil, who's the chair of the school committee, budget subcommittee.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, Jamie. And most importantly, thank all of you, the engaged citizens of Franklin, for being here, both here in person and online. It's a testament to this room and all the engagement we've had over this past year of just the care that this community has for its current well-being, but also for its future. And that's really what we're all here tonight, next month, and over the course of the next few months. That's exactly what we're here for, to have a clear, transparent, and honest dialogue about where we are right now and where we expect to be, and how the well-being of our town, how we expect that to develop, and really so that we can have the information to make the informed decisions of what we want our town to look like, what services we want to have, we want our schools to look like. And we're all here because we care about our community and we want what's best for our community. And we might have different ideas of what that means, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're having a very honest and open dialogue amongst the members of this body here, from the three financial bodies, as well as in our community, to build trust, to make sure that we know that the decisions that we're making as a community are well informed and we know where we're going and we can make the decisions that we think are best. So thank you all, and turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, before we start into the agenda, I think it's important that we introduce ourselves so that everybody knows who everybody is and what board they represent. So, Lauren, you want to start?
Certainly. So my name is Lauren Nagel. I am, I think, maybe one of the newest to the Finance Committee. I just joined last year, was my first full year. This is my second year. My background is in finance and operations, so that's me.
Thank you, Lauren.
Nicole Corbacero, Finance Committee, gosh, I don't know how long I've been on it. 5 years, maybe 6, I don't know. It's been a little while. Similar to Lauren, background is finance, budgeting, CPA by trade, so very much love numbers. Yeah, nice to see you all.
Thanks, Nicole.
George Conley, Chairman of the Finance Committee since about 2013. Like Tom, and I think a little longer, a lifelong resident of this town, so I care a lot. I think I got him by 2, maybe 3 years, which is a lot at this age. And I'll make the plug that I make at the Finance Committee meetings. We are the only body in town that looks at every single line of every single budget in the town. And let me tell you, we've looked at a lot of lines over the last few years. Guys, there's no fat laying around underneath. There's no hidden money. Jamie has no money in his desk drawer. What you see is what you get. Thank you.
My name is Ruth Ann O'Sullivan. I know most of you. I am on the school committee. I would be remiss not to mention that I was chairing the One Franklin Committee, and that's what landed me on the school committee. So I never really had political aspirations, but here I am. I have a legal finance background, and unofficially through One Franklin, I did meet with all the different department heads and looked at every budget. So it sort of was a benefit, I think, being on the school committee and understanding that we're not grabbing this from another department. So Lucas has said it many times that, that's not what we're trying to do here when we try to fund the schools appropriately. So, thanks.
Well,
Hello, everyone. I'm Melanie Hamblin. I am on the town council. This is my 4th term. And I've only lived in Franklin for 14 years, but I really care deeply about it as well. So, and I want to thank everyone for being here. And really the engagement that we've had within the last year has been spectacular. We can't do this alone. We can't do it in a vacuum. We need you all here in the room with us. And thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
thanks, Mel. Dave?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dave McNeil. I serve as the vice chair of the school committee, as well as the chair of the school committee's budget subcommittee. Like I said before, thank you all for your engagement in coming out here. I'm born and raised here in Franklin, so I've been here almost all my life, and it's been a pleasure to be able to serve here, and looking forward to the conversation we're having tonight and over the course of this budget cycle. So thank you all.
Thanks, Dave. Tom Mercer, feels like I've been here forever. Not quite as long as George. I've been on the council for, I don't know, 12 or 13 years, I don't know. I've lost track of time. But thanks, Paul. Prior to that, I did 11, 10 years on the school committee, with which I chaired the school committee, and on the school building committees. And I do it all, as I say many times, because I love my town, and it's a great community. Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Chandler, Town Council. I'm going on my 6th year this November. Thank you. Before that, I spent my whole career serving this town as a police officer, and as everyone else here, I really do love this town, and I hope we can work out some of these financial issues. Thank you.
Hi everyone, Natalie Riley. I am the vice chair for the Finance Committee, going on 4 years now, just recently for the last year as vice chair. Fairly long-time resident, looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Thank you. Paul, are you?
Yes, I'm here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So first, sorry for my absence, everyone. I'm actually on my way to a military funeral down in D.C., but I appreciate you letting me zoom in on the panel. My name is Paul Griffith. I'm a first-term school committee member. My background is predominantly in genetics and biotechnology. Years. Look forward to being able to continue to give back to the community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Paul. Councilor Frangillo?
He's not there. Oh, yes, he is.
Yeah, he said he was running in a tough area, but then he right back on, so. Are you there, Cody?
Sorry, yeah, I'm here. Having a connection issues, but we'll be stable in just a few minutes.
Okay. All right. Councilor Frangillo, member of the town council, has been there for.
Third term.
6 years.
Well,
Six,
he had like that
five
one,
years.
that
Yeah,
half a
that's
term.
half term.
Yeah.
But also a lifelong resident of Franklin, but not as long as George and I. Okay, so we'll move to the agenda. And the first item on the agenda is the committee charge. And before I ask if there are any questions from the committee, I just want to make sure that everybody understands the role of the Joint Budget Subcommittee. We are an advisory committee. Our decisions are not final by any means. Our recommendations, I'm sure, as far as the council goes, we will take the recommendations from this committee and present them to the entire council. Just like Dave will take the recommendations from this committee and present them to the entire school committee. And the same with the finance committee, George will take it back to them. So we are not a decision-making committee. We are an advisory committee. But we are made up of the budget subcommittees of each of those three entities. So I would expect, and I'm sure, as has been done in the past, that the committees certainly are listening very strongly to what gets brought back from this body. And I think over the course of this year's building of the budget, I think you'll see more and more councilors, school committee members present in the audience or on Zoom, just watching and taking in exactly what's going on. And just another question that I know I've been asked a couple of times, why is there 4 members of the town council and only 3 members of the school committee, 4 members of the finance committee? It's because you cannot have a quorum on any subcommittee. Therefore, the council's made up of 9 members. You can have 4 members on a subcommittee. School committee's made up of 7 members. You can only have 3 members from the school committee. That's why there's only 3 versus 4. And finance committee, obviously, 4 doesn't constitute a quorum. So, I don't think we published the responsibilities of the budget subcommittee online. It's on the website. I know everybody, all committee members have had an opportunity to go through that. So I think at this point, I'd just ask if there is any questions from the committee as to the roles and responsibilities of the joint budget subcommittee. Everybody did their homework. Is there anyone out in council chambers that has a question on roles and responsibility of the joint budget subcommittee? Everybody did that. I should ask, is there anyone out in Zoom land? I don't see anybody here. Okay. So we will move on to the second item on the agenda, which is the annual budget calendar for town departments. And I'll turn it over to the town administrator, take us through that.
Sure. So through Mr. Chairman, just for those that have never, so usually this is a document, we've shared it publicly before, but usually this is a document I send out to the departments sometime in late, mid-October. Some of the meetings we try to set up, it's a very similar schedule to what we've done in the past. Some people can get a little confused between the capital budget versus the operating budget. There are 2 separate processes. The town's been doing this to great effect for many years. So as folks can see here, it's a little preliminary. It's about a month or so earlier than I would have sent it to the departments, but I think, as the superintendent said earlier, everybody's well aware of the fiscal challenges, and I think a lot of our departments, and I know the schools have already as well, despite their full plate, you know, they're having conversations with their principals, staffs, department heads, and our folks are certainly going to be doing their budget development process through the fall. The capital budget is pretty straightforward, but this, for some people, may seem like, why is this a big out here? Well, it's just trying again to be, as Lucas said earlier, transparent. This is what the department heads work off of. This is our general timeline through the year. One thing I would note, why is the capital budget start in December? Usually we don't get our free cash or retained earnings certified until Halloween. Roughly around there. Sometimes it can be a little later in November, sometimes it can be a little bit earlier. But that's a safe date to start that process in December, and all of our staffs will get a little additional input from the CFO and the budget director you know, over the next few weeks when those Google Drives are set up and they can send out the spreadsheets for people to fill in about the capital program. So I know most of you on the board are familiar with this, you've been through it before, but for the public that's joining us last year for the first time or hasn't been engaged, you know, this is kind of the cheat sheet we work off of. The second point I'd make is the operating budget is on page 2. And you will notice in here one minor change with Lucas's support, I will add. After the pandemic years, we were allowing a little extra time for departments to get their budgets submitted for the operating budget for the upcoming fiscal year. But given, I think, the urgency and a lot in the community, we bumped up that deadline this year back to where it normally was before the pandemic, which is before the holiday season or a little bit, you know, before the Christmas holiday. And so we're asking for departmental budgets to be, to go through that process. And some people may say, geez, why is it so late? Well, if you're the DPW, you're monitoring fuel costs. You know, if you're the facilities director, you're monitoring costs of cleaning supplies. I mean, with inflation going on, we don't want to put numbers out so early that are ironclad that are gonna change throughout the system. And as you know, and the board members up here know, but the public may not be aware, the superintendent and I and our staffs monitor, and our department heads and principals monitor the costs of goods and services every day, all year, through the entire end of the budget, usually through March. And so by the end of March, usually each year, we kind of know from local receipts, and we'll go through this a little bit later, but we kind of start to get a better idea. Are we going to anticipate any huge spikes in goods and services in the following fiscal year? We want to make sure we track that so we can get the best prices, we can have the best strategies, and we can utilize the public's money to the best of our ability, as well as maintaining and seeing if there are any huge cost increases that we didn't anticipate, say like around September, October, November. So this is pretty boilerplate. It's pretty typical. As we'll talk about a little bit later on page 3, I know this is can be challenging to understand, but most, if not almost everything regarding municipal finance, the schedule is generally baked into state law. So for example, the governor will not release her budget until late January, maybe even early February, because it's, there's an election this year. And the state has their own budget issues, as we've seen in the press, kind of going up and down with hitting their benchmark revenues. So the legislatures and the governor are going to be additionally cautious, and as Secretary Gorkowitz had announced yesterday, through the month of August, the state is 0.3% below benchmark. That's basically on target. That's really good because July and August are not good tax revenue collection months, but the state is monitoring that. So they're going to also wait until they have the best information, and so I will not anticipate any state aid, any UGA, Chapter 70, or any other formula numbers until the end of January. And all that is laid out here, Mr. Chairman, in our budget memo. I did this send out to all the department heads, and I appreciate the superintendents acknowledging this when we met, and is going to work to the best of their ability to get a budget to us, and certainly something to work with before December. But in his case too, there's things out there that you don't know the full cost of until you get into January, February, March. So, so I just wanted to point those things out really quickly.
Can I just chime in too? I think I know the school committee's desire to have our budget timeline moved up as well. We've typically had the budget recommended by March. It's out for approval for the school committee, but we have been backing up our timeline. And I think it's also, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, around as we start to plan for next year and reorganize, the budget's predicated on the adequate staffing that we want to put forth to move the district forward. So we are planning to move up our budget timeline as well, to the degree we can, to be as close to having that information, because we don't want to be the reason things are hung up in the process. And you know how I've spoken publicly about this before around having May for the approval, definitely, but I would say that we are going to do our best to get everything we can as early as possible to try to be just for this purpose, so we can build this out and have the information people need.
Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, Jim. Questions from the committee on the calendar for?
Can I just, I was asked this question, I know the answer due to my background, but I was asked why we have it, what is the difference between the capital and the operating? What makes it into one category versus the other?
Sure. No, it's a fantastic question. So capital are one-time monies that the town has to spend on capital infrastructure. And we have a financial policy on capital infrastructure. It's on the town website, both Finance Committee, Comptroller, it's in several places. Those usually are vehicles, both for town and school. Technology is a big investment. Again, those are one-time costs, for I don't even know what those screens are. The touch view screens, you only need those once every 10 years, right? You need a dump truck once every 20 years. You need a ladder truck every 20 years. You need an ambulance every 4 years, right? So those are non-reoccurring costs. Mm-hmm. And the other great part of your question, Lauren, is how do you fund the capital program? Well, that number ebbs and flows every year. And really, there's two buckets, and it's in the budget narrative if people want to go dig in a little bit deeper. The free cash total is generally made up of source one is unspent monies from the municipal budget only, okay? the schools are set under a different set of state laws, just to be clear. And number two, any unanticipated revenues. So if a project, a commercial building, for example, we don't know when a commercial building is going to come online because of the myriad of issues around development and commercial. And then all of a sudden, a commercial building comes online. A very good example would be the hotel up behind, next to Spruce Pond. That project started, then got delayed with the pandemic for a couple of years. We didn't even know if the hotel was gonna open. And then within a year, they started construction, rebuilt it. Those building permit fees that are associated with that, we would not have anticipated that revenue source at the beginning of the fiscal year because we didn't know if that building would come online. And that building fee comes in, and after the tax rate is set in December, that money then goes into what's called free cash. And free cash is certainly, again, I know it's a cliche and it's funny, but it's not free and it's not cash. But it's made up of those two sources. Then that pot of money goes through the capital budget process. Both, I think the school committee has one on their priorities, the town has one on theirs, and then it goes through on the process. And there's like an org chart on the budget website if people want to follow along. But I hope that answers your question, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the calendar from the committee?
I have a question.
Sure.
So if the deadline for the budgets to come in is December 1st, it's going to be difficult, and I'm going into this conversation assuming there will be a need for an override, we just don't know how much. So if people, police, fire, DPW, I know, Lucas, you said you could probably get it together by December 1st, even with the new redistricting numbers.
Just to correct you, December 1st is the capital deadline.
That's right.
Oh, capital, sorry, all
Just to
right.
be clear, because they're operating in capital.
Okay, all right, I'll take it back then, because I'm not going to follow through with what I was questioning. Yeah, okay.
Any other questions on calendar from the committee? Is there any questions on the calendar from council chambers? Please, just come forward. Just give us name and address, please.
Susan Rohrbach, 38 Philomena Way. Did I miss something? I don't remember if you had a deadline for the operating budget. You just said the capital budget is due December 1st, but what about the operating budgets?
December 20th.
December 20th.
I want to note, for the schools as well as the town, those operating budget proposals, once they're in, it kind of gives us what really you base the budget off of for FY26, what the needs are, what the priorities are, and those numbers get refined, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, I'm sure, in the fiscal forecast.
Okay, thanks.
Question?
Yep, that was it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in council chambers that has a question on the calendar? Is there anyone out in Zoom land that has a question on the calendar? Okay, seeing none, we will move to town administrator budget memo and 5-year fiscal forecast packet. Jamie?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm not gonna go through a PowerPoint or anything. I think, I wrote a 3-page memo. For those following at home or that are watching on TV, if you go to franklinma.gov and go to the town calendar, you'll find the Joint Budget Subcommittee posting for tonight, and the packet that I'm referencing is right there. You can see all the numbers, you can see the assumptions. I just want to be clear, the first sentence of this is we've attached a sketch. This is the earliest I've ever done a fiscal anything. Usually we start doing these a little later in October and November. But to bump up the conversation and engage folks, I just want to make sure everybody is very clear. The assumptions that are in here can easily change. They're going to every single number except for the Prop 2.5 is going to change at some point, even new growth. And so we just put these in here. No one should take this fiscal forecast or this 5-year rollout as anything more than just a start. And in talking with you, Mr. Chairman, I thought it was important. This is what we all start with the CFO and the school business administrator. It's just the basics. We don't debate anything. This isn't a debate. We just add in to stay under the Prop 2.5 levy. We just add in 2.5% right in the personnel and expense column right down the list. So I'm just going to walk through. I'm not going to walk through all the numbers because the general assumptions that are in here. Number one, this is based off the final approved budget by the town council in July. And I would note that the final state budget did have a $17,000 less than what we had budgeted. We will make that up in November. For folks that don't know, in town meeting forms of government, November, usually there's a budget adjustment, and the reason why we do that is local budgets generally are approved at the local level before the state budget process is done. I understand that seems confusing to the early novice, but that's the way it's been for however many years, and that's all in state law, so there's really not much a lot I can do about it. We also assumed in here the loss of the $3.032 million in one-time monies in FY26. We also accommodated in here the Tri-County debt exclusion, which both raises the revenue for that project, but also adds it on the debt schedule that folks can see in the debt exclusion part of the revenue sheet. The revenue assumptions in this model are very, very basic. It puts right up on top on the revenue sheet. You can see in that top line, I've gone through this many years now. I hope we're following along right here, right across the board. All you do is just take that number from 25 and just add 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5 right across the board. One of the questions I think you've gotten all summer and all year is, do you always go to 2.5? We have gone to 2.5, I think at least since Jeff Nutting was town administrator. I can't speak about the 80s and 90s, but we've always gone into 2.5 levy capacity. For those that do comparables with other towns and do research, not every town does this. Not every town does this. You start at 2.5 and they start whittling down to 2.3 or 2.22, and so we've always stayed at 2.5. This model up here assumes new growth is going to stay stagnant at 1 million. The really good news right now is the assessors have already confirmed that we have met our budget projection for this coming year. We've already hit the $1 million, so by the time we get to November, I'm guessing that the new growth number might be 1.1, 1.2, which is really good news. It's not a lot, but why is that important? Not only is it a little extra for free cash for the capital program that Lauren asked for before, but then maybe we can find some sort of hope that those new growth numbers will climb back up and we can maybe assume in FY26 a higher revenue amount. That's why I've got to caution everybody. Everything that's written down here is just a sketch. And so I would note, as I did in the memo, from our peak in 2020, new growth has plummeted almost 45%, right? So it was 1.9 million almost 4 years ago. It's now down to about 1 million. We barely got over the finish line this year and last year. So. And for those that don't know what new growth is unanticipated tax levy projects in the similar vein that I explained to Lauren earlier, where when they go out to do appraisals at the assessors, they may capture a residence, for example, that maybe did a kitchen renovation or put a deck on their house or a new roof or an extension or an ADU. Thank you, Melanie. Absolutely, an ADU. She's 100% right. Which, by the way, we are open for business on ADUs. If you're interested in an ADU, cheap plug, but on your property, talk to the building commissioner. They do not deny ADUs, so it's a good way to generate new growth. And then just down let me just move a little bit further down here. Sheet. Local receipts. I added in here a 5%. Increase on those as an assumption, just so people know. On local receipts, the CFO and I, we see what each quarter. We go quarter one, end of September. And then we go at the end of the calendar year and we look at what the trends are in meals tax, cannabis excise tax, hotel taxes, ambulance receipts, motor vehicle excise tax, fees and assessments. Local receipts are the same equivalent virtually to what the schools have for revolving funds. It's very important for everybody to know the schools control the revolving funds on their own. I don't even know the process at which they go to appropriate those or even if it's required, but the schools have the revolving funds for fees and licenses and building usages and in the cafe and all those other revolving funds they have, those are in the control of the schools. Those are not in the operating budget. But for municipal departments, our local receipts offset the costs of the services. So the Board of Health brings in money every year to pay for the health inspector. My office brings in a lot of money every year for licensing, alcohol, common victualers, liveries. So all of the fees and local receipts, some of those offset my salary or Amy's salary, the town attorneys, so on and so on. Ryan Jetty is probably the most famous of all, where most of his fees, if not all of them, pay for his entire department. So with a lot of folks that I was talking to over the summer, if you want to reduce the costs in the recreation department, you're also cutting off the revenue source, because he's basically a dollar for dollar. What comes in pays for what goes out. The senior center pays for about 35%, so on and so on. So we put in there just usually as a standard start to the budget year, until we see the quarter 1 and quarter 2 local receipts, we usually add a 5% markup in those. Obviously, trends can show different things, but right now our local receipts have been pretty solid. And then state aid, we added in here a 5% increase and also a 5% decrease on state assessments. We did receive one email regarding this issue, and there's no question as we go on, we can add in an assumption of 2%, right? We can absolutely do that, and we will, as we get better information from the governor, lieutenant governor, and secretary in A&F. It is important to monitor what they're saying. I would note, for those that really want to get geeky about local government and finance, there's a joint revenue hearing in December in the State House. There's usually a huge press around that. That is a very, very key date in terms of what's going to happen on state aid. And both the superintendent and I are in touch with our advocacy organizations and the Superintendent's Association about leading up to that consensus revenue forecast in December. We stay in touch with our associations to see what the trends are at the state level so we can try to anticipate. That 5%, I'll be honest, I would love it. I'm hopeful. Is it a high number that we can expect? Probably not. And I did mention that in my memo. I made it very, very clear when I made that assumption that the 5% was likely high. On the flip side, the assessments are also an issue that take a little while to funnel out, because I think there's reporting deadlines about when school enrollment happens in October 1st. So the state won't be able to calculate state assessments. It's not just about the state aid we get. It's also about the assessments we're charged. And as you can see here in the column, in FY26, we're anticipating about a $6.2 million assessment to the charter school, and about a $540,000 assessment for school choice from students that leave Franklin and choose another school. There's a revenue formula that follows with that. So I just caution everybody to make sure the revenues, when we hear, and there's nobody more excited when they say $104 per pupil, there's nobody more excited than me, but we also have to make sure we monitor the trends of the charter school enrollment, the school choice enrollment, because those become deductions, essentially, off of our Chapter 78. Those are the revenue assumptions on this sheet, Mr. Chairman. Why don't we stop there and just see if there's any questions before we go to the expenses?
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Okay, I'll go to the committee first. Any questions from the committee on the revenue side? Mr. Chandler.
Through you to the town administrator and possibly the superintendent. Whenever we talk about overrides or anything, one of the first questions I always get is about those revolving funds, say the $6 million. Now, there's no way the schools could just use any of that for their general fund. It all has to stay.
So we spent those down, and Dr. Dutch is here with me as well, because this question came up last time we met, I think. Is he standing? Come on up.
It's a standard question I get almost every time it comes up, yeah.
Okay, all right.
We thought he was retired.
He
wants to stand up.
You notice? You bring him on board a year later, he's like, I don't know what I signed up for.
No, the revolving funds cannot be used for the general fund in a general sense. They do go against general fund expenses specifically, so any revenue that comes into the revolving account for transportation has to be used for transportation expenses. Anything that comes in for athletic fees has to be used to offset the cost of athletics, which is what we do every year. So that's why those dollars that you see there are already spoken for.
So Mr. Helen talked about our process. Basically, the money collected needs to go to the direct, it's basically in the laws, the direct benefit of the reason it was collected in the first place. So that's how you keep the accounting straight on.
And
You can't take our athletic money and apply it to,
And the process is only the school committee can authorize the expenditure of the revolving funds. So what will happen is they'll get a warrant, so to speak, at one of the school committee meetings that will outline the transfer of funds or the reclassification of funds from the revolving account to our operating account to offset. Usually it's a deficit, so we'll overspend our athletic account and then refund it back into the operating expense from revolving. But the school committee authorizes that. I can't actually transfer those funds, and the comptroller won't move those funds until they see the signed copy from the school committee.
Thank you, Dr. Dutch.
You're welcome.
I will refer everyone to this snippet.
I think one question, Bob, before you sit down, let me just ask, nice try. Just to take Brian's question a step further, I know some of the audience that were tuned in last year as we talked about the revolving funds. The leftover revolving funds from going from one year to the next. Why do we do that?
Well, first of all, there aren't a lot of leftover funds, and I'll give you an example. So one of the accounts that has leftover funds every year is circuit breaker. So this year, there's $3.8 million left over because those are funds that we got this year, and we use them to offset the costs the following year. There are some school districts that spend as they get it. We like to be a little more practical and save it as a reserve and spend it in the following year so that we always have that cushion. And I know that, Jamie and I have talked, the school department has no stabilization accounts, whereas the town has a couple. Special ed, usually in most school districts, they have a stabilization account. They fund that maybe to $1 million. We don't have it, so this acts for us as a stabilization account so that if students move in and we overspend, we're not coming back to you and asking for some additional funds. We're going to use it out of circuit breaker. Okay? So it's our rainy day fund, but it's, a small amount. And I come from a regional school background. In a regional school district, we are allowed to have 5% of our budget in stabilization funds. We don't have 5% of our budget in revolving accounts as surpluses. We're less than that. Okay?
Thank you, Bob. I
Yep.
just think it was important for people to understand, because that question always comes up, why is there money left over in the revolving accounts moving from year to year?
It's cautionary. Yep.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you. Jamie?
Thank you. Really quickly, before Bob goes back to his seat. Number one, I wanted to point out, when you see the appropriation in this budget, the town-wide budget for $77 million or whatever it was, from the town-wide budget to the school district, the actual real school budget is much larger than that because of the revolving funds. So when they go back and the school committee approves a budget, it's whatever, 90 million or what?
It's 89 million.
89 million. It's the same dynamic as local receipts, right? He has the same situation. And I know it's confusing for people, but again, a lot of this stuff is etched out in state law. So we're just following what's in state law and how we have to approve a townwide budget and how the schools have to approve their budget. But just like their revolving funds are paying for a service, paying for the staff, the athletic, whatever, It's the same dynamic for us across all of our departments. The Board of Health, the town clerk, planning, conservation. Those local receipts are our form of revolving funds that offset the costs in this budget. One question I got over and over was about the comp and class plan. And what people have been trying to get out for a long time, and I've done it individually, is most of the market adjustments that were made because of the compensation and classification plan had a local receipt revenue source to it that was applicable from that department. So in the case of those departments bringing in more revenue, so actually the vast majority of those wage adjustments that were made from that market analysis did not actually impact the entire town budget or the entire tax levy. In the same way that if you were to do a cost increase for somebody in athletics, for example, their fee might capture the cost of actually what that adjustment was. I just want to make sure everybody's clear about that, because I think people felt like we didn't have the money to pay for these things, and we actually did. And there was also some reforms that were made in departments. You saw some of them on the Tier 1 list that we did on some of the municipal cuts. With the Finance Department, Board of Health, we move jobs around, we reallocate things. The schools do the same thing, and so does every other city and town. And so sometimes you save money in a budget that helps allocate and reroute money somewhere else. So I just wanted to address those things while they're there. And Bob is correct on this town stabilization account and the school one. And this is a dynamic, I think, that we have been trying to educate the public on for a long time. We all know the schools for many years, the town would have a budget rainy day fund, and in 18 and 19 we used those funds. But Bob just pointed something that I haven't heard anybody say in a long time, which is the schools don't have a rainy day fund. This is something the Finance Committee has talked about. Sue Dusnap, when she was on the Finance Committee, was a huge advocate for the town-wide stabilization fund to get a AAA bond rating. And we have also supported the schools trying to find some sort of way to have that cushion. And I'm not going to editorialize whether they're in good shape right now or not, but we've all tried to get there, because the less pressure that's on them to have a cushion or a rainy day fund, that means our bond rating is then stronger because we have more in the bank in our own stabilization funds. I know that's a little too much Finance 102 for people, but that's how all of this connects together. And so this is some, pretty detailed stuff, but I thought while he mentioned it, I would make a few more comments to contextualize that for folks. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucas, did you have anything to add?
No. I think they summarized it well.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Lauren,
Sorry.
that's okay.
I'd be remiss to just not point out, I know these are very preliminary, high-level, first pass, but the very first line is not just baseline plus 2.5. It looks like it's plus 3.5. I just want to point that out just to make sure, because it adds $1 million, it's actually $1 million worse if that formula is adjusted to the 2.5.
So that's a great point. So yet she is correct, but just to make sure we're clear, she's not saying the 2.5 is really 3.5. The new growth adds an additional % roughly to that number. And so she is correct. The problem is that's a linear number every year. So if you lose new growth, you're decreasing the tax levy. If you increase new growth, you're increasing the tax levy. And then the year after that, you're multiplying that new growth number by 2.5%. And mainly the 3.5% number is relatively accurate. It just depends on where those new growth statistics are.
That answer your question?
Um,
If it didn't, please.
Yeah, so
No,
I just did
that's
straight
why
up,
we're here.
I know, I just did straight up math, the 96 over the 92. I didn't factor in the 1 million, and it was 3.5.
It's the 93, so if you do the 93.
Then over
to the
97, it's still
96,
3.5, yeah,
That's
so,
2.5.
yeah,
Plus a
That
million.
math checks.
yep, that math checks. What? I know, okay, that's important,
Did I see a hand, Sue, did I see your hand?
When the time comes.
Oh, okay, thought you had it up. Ms. Falvey, please. Name and address, please.
Frank Edward Falvey, 920 Pond Street. The Tri-County School a few years ago received a $500,000 grant for their culinary arts program. The town of Franklin receives grants. How is that accounted for? And is there any anticipated grant money in the presentation you're giving tonight?
We didn't prepare any any presentations tonight regarding money. However, to answer your question, we do apply for grants. We do disclose those, and through the budget process, that total number that Dr. Dutch mentioned includes the revenue, grants, and it's the total number. So we can provide a breakout. I'm making notes of what people are asking so that we can come back with more information. But yes, we do. Their culinary arts is a vocational school. Their application for that and what they received is due to their programming. I will say I'm excited about the work that we're doing at Franklin High, separate of Voc, to really look at, to putting a fresh eye to how we're organizing our programming for kids. That makes us eligible for other potential grant opportunities as well that fit a K through 12 public school. So our version of that. So I can't speak on Tri-County, but I can just speak for us that we can provide that information. It's also online. If you look at last year's presentations, I think we did 9 of them, but some of them have the grant information, and it's a good question.
But there's no anticipated grant money on the school budget that's being presented tonight, is that correct?
Correct.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. Frank, so in the townwide budget here, grants are not reflected in this budget. Grants are by law special revenue, for at least the municipality, they're what's called special revenue accounts. They're one-time monies for a very specific purpose, and our auditors look to make sure that we're spending the money obviously on that purpose, and we have to do reports to the state. Frank, there are a couple, the grantors do too. There are a couple of exceptions to that, which are reoccurring grants. The senior center has a reoccurring grant formula in state law, and the Board of Health right now is under a 3 to 5 year regional agreement. And so if you look, I'm not going to go through it because it's not on these sheets, but if you look in the thick budget, you'll see the total cost of the senior center, and then down below you'll see a reduction in those costs that reflect both fees, licenses, food sales, actually the senior center, for programs, and then it will also show that on the Board of Health that there's like a $50,000 reduction each year. When that comes up, those are the only 2 things I can think of off the top of my head where we get reoccurring money that we bake into this formula right here, Frank. But every other grant, like Grove Street and PFAS grants and all these other things, none of those one-time revenue grant monies are in this budget.
And none is reflected in the town side budget in anticipation of what you're showing tonight?
That's correct. There's no grant money in here at all, other than those 2 exceptions that I just mentioned.
One other question. The audience tonight, you're going to be looking at more detailed documents and line items. Will the audience have an ability to look at the same line items that you have the ability to look at?
Absolutely, and every year we publish those. You can go onto our budget archive. You know, I do think that, I think we all agree, one of the things, and I know I've talked to the superintendent about it, is if people are really looking to go another layer deeper than what we're talking about at these meetings, you can only do so much within a couple hours. You know, I really encourage people. I know that the budget document's 100 pages long. I know that the line item by line item that George referenced is 200 pages long. But it'll answer the overwhelming amount of questions that I receive, I think the superintendent probably receives, our departments receive. And so, Frank, I wouldn't expect that level of detail till probably sometime in the winter.
But when you reach that level of detail, could you publish a website or the procedure for individuals if they care to review that?
You will be able to bring those questions to a joint budget subcommittee and ask them and get your answer.
They're all online now. There's right on the homepage, Frank, if you want to print out a copy, we can, but it's all online right now.
And how might anyone with a computer like to go online? What is the magic words you got to put in the computer?
FranklinMA.gov, town budget. It's right on the homepage, and you can go in there and, you know, there is a lot of material, but it's, I think, pretty well organized.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Frank.
Tom, I have a quick question.
Oh, before I go to you,
Yeah.
Sue.
I just, the chapter 78, it's increasing 5% or so, and it's typically hasn't, I just had a conversation with Bob Dutch about this, because it felt high, but you know, I think you were on the email that we got from Sue. And I just want to be careful, like, as we tighten this up. The Chapter 70 school aid, which I guess for anyone who doesn't know, Chapter 70 is what the state gives the schools. And in Franklin, it's based primarily on median income and home values or land values. So we get, I know George talked about this last year, Milford gets like, you know, 45 million, we get like 29. We just typically get like a % increase. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I don't want to overestimate,
Sure.
you know, as we go into the season.
Yeah, it's not something to, you know, get into a big discussion about, but the next model that'll come out, I'll probably have a more realistic number based on the information I'm getting from the state. I can easily plug in 1%, 2% in any future models. It's just, I'm trying to articulate, I think, and bring everybody through from a staff level where we start off every year. And that's just the assumptions that are there. But Sue's correct. You know, we can use 2%.
2%'s even high, though. It's been like 1 at the highest.
It was 3.5% 2 years ago, and it was 1.75% last year. Again, Mr. Chairman, tonight's purpose is not to really have an omnibus debate about that assumption. I've already explained before and now, we will rewrite that assumption to be another 1 or 2%. And as a result, and I think the point people want to point out is that the budget deficit is actually larger.
Right,
than what's
that's
there.
what I'm worried
Yeah, I
about.
know.
Is I'm just like, I don't want people looking at this and be like, oh, we'll be right, you know, because.
Yeah. But in totality, through Mr. Chairman, even some of that number, local receipts may be a high number also, right? So we have to monitor these things. New growth may be low. So in the totality of the budget, I'm just trying to articulate on, you know, week after Labor Day, we put in some base assumptions, and we will revise that to a more accurate number based off, you know, what we think it might be. So we'll decrease that from 5% down to 2.5%, and we'll also do the same thing with the state assessments. We'll rewrite that number as well.
Bob gave me a graph and it was like, it's not that, so just, I would, if you want to check with Jana or something, because that's they've got some historical data on that. I'm overly cautious of the narrative through you, Chair, just that if numbers can get up a little bit, they can go down a little bit, and when we're wishy-washy or we're not as accurate as we can be, then people get hopeful, and we don't get a clear, concise, unified vision of what we need. And I know it's not going to be exact, but, you know, the school side can help tighten up the school numbers with you as much as possible, too. So, thanks.
Jamie, why don't you bring in at the next joint budget
Sure.
subcommittee 1.5%?
You got it.
Okay?
And we will, just so we reiterate, we will never have the actual numbers
That's right.
until late January, early
These are
February. So
still
we will
guessing.
always be assuming until the cherry sheets come out from the state at the end of January, early February.
Right.
Okay.
Can I ask one more question?
Sir, 1 second.
Okay, sorry.
Ruth Ann, are you done?
Keep going. I'm done. I'm looking at FY '24, because I got this from Bob Dutch, because I was concerned. I said, does this look high to you? Because I don't know everything. In '24, it was 1.1, '23, 1.1, 22.6, 21, 0, 20.6. So it's like $1 million off. So that's why I'm making such a big deal about this.
It's okay. We'll
Yeah.
change it for October.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, my question's about the budget, you know, FY '25. When does that actually become actual? We're in the middle, you know, it's year end, it gets audited, I'm assuming, and that turns into an actual at some point? Is that what you were talking about, the Halloween date, right?
So, yes. So By statute, we have to set the tax rate late November, early December. There's a date that's kind of a deadline in early December. And then once we set the tax rate, that's the end of any adjustments you can make to the current fiscal year budget, which is usually, we'll come back to the Finance Committee with a revised budget probably in November. It'll have very few adjustments to it, just based on what we did, you know, in June and July. And then you go through the rest of the fiscal year. We're kind of doing FY25 trends.
Yeah.
Making sure our revenues are hitting benchmarks, right, as we go along, but we're also looking at those trends and trying to prospectively assume for the following fiscal year. Our summers, and I know I can speak for the schools too, in our finance team, our summers are actually very, very busy in finance because we are doing our year-end reports and all of those year actuals, encumbrances, a lot of other stuff in July and August. And then our auditors come in, you know, well after, you know, usually in the spring, late winter or early winter, for the previous fiscal year.
Yeah.
That's about as short as I can say it.
Yeah, no, and I'm just saying, like,
I
it's
hope that
nice to
helps,
have
Lauren.
sort of a baseline column that's actuals. You know what I mean? So as we look at all the projections, to see 1 year of actual, you know, so that, it's just, that's how my brain likes to see it, just what's a true historical number, so that when you're looking at the projections, you have something to base it on.
Yep.
That's all.
And we do go through the year-to-dates, and we do go through the actuals at the Finance Committee meetings periodically.
Yep,
All set, Lauren?
yes, thank you.
Sue? Name and address,
Oh,
please.
Susan Dusnap, 10 Garden Street. Jamie already gave me a shout out. Thank you, Jamie. I try to keep a low profile. I'm not doing a good job. I'm not going to beat up the Chapter 70 number again, but I do have a suggestion because I listened to a lot of the meetings after the fact. I can't be here to all of them. Perhaps consider breaking out the Chapter 70 between our allocated number, that calculated number, and our hold harmless number. Because I get very concerned when I listen to some of the town meetings that I still don't think some of the folks on our committees even understand what that means. And I think it would be really helpful as we have these discussions going forward. I believe that hold harmless number is risky. Scary, very scary. So just a consideration for everybody on the committee. I can't tell you what to do.
I think I spoke to it the last time we had a
You did,
meeting
Tom.
about it. And I said that, you know, the hold harmless is just a scary,
Absolutely.
scary situation.
Absolutely.
At
Jamie
any time it
mentioned,
could be.
yeah.
I'm gonna split the difference with Sue on this one. I agree with her on the hold harmless piece, but the revenue sheet that we have here actually mirrors the cherry sheets. But I will say, so I don't wanna necessarily change this to break it out because we're now conflating things. Hold harmless is a different formula altogether. I will agree with Sue completely, as I've illustrated for many, many years. Hold harmless is very, very nerve-wracking to me. And I will say, I would ask that if Jonna or Bob or somebody else could maybe give a periodic update on hold harmless, I think Sue's spot on. The more we talk about that and how we're arriving at that number and why that's happening is a very, very important piece. What I get nervous of is more so getting into, Mark Abrams does Chapter 70 classes. I know that he's got, and I don't want, and you just heard his side. I think we can go as deep as people want on Chapter 70. I know the formula quite well. But when you get into the formula, as Lucas's sounds just came across, it can dry out a room pretty quick. It's really, really detailed. But the aggregate number of the trend of hold harmless, Sue is totally right. But that does not necessarily relate to this revenue sheet.
Understood, but if we just were
We need to know the
able
numbers.
to articulate that number
Yeah.
during these meetings so that we hear it at least.
Yeah, because being in that hold harmless clause, obviously, we're not seeing 2.5% increase, right? So I think I'm a numbers person, I need a hobby, but this is what I do. My second thought, my only other question, Jamie, you mentioned something in your comments, you put an acronym out there, AMF, and I'm not familiar with that. What is that? ANF? Maybe it's N.
ANF, the Secretariat of Administration and Finance, and it's A with a
Oh, an
squiggly
ampersand.
and F, but people colloquially will call it ANF, is like, because it just rhymes. It's kind of a weird,
Okay.
dumb bureaucratic joke, but
Thank
yeah,
you.
it's
It's like Guns N' Roses.
it's like Guns N' Roses, yeah. Good
All right, great. Thank you very much.
Welcome to the jungle.
Max, I think, if you want to come up. Name and address, please, for those who don't know who you are.
My name is Maxwell Marangelo. I live at 127 Central Park Terrace. I just had a quick question about sort of special, the state aid we get for special education, and I want to know how much of our costs for special education that covers, both for total amount and at the marginal level for like each additional student.
Lucas, you, or you want to call in the reinforcements too?
Well,
Bob's already on his way up.
that's also tough. I can answer and say that that's a difficult question to answer in this moment in time, and it also changes based on the special education needs of your district at any given time.
And changes throughout the year.
And one move-in can change that number. So I would say, I appreciate the question. I made a note as we go through the process. That's another number that we can answer and have clarity on from Max. But go ahead, Bob.
So I can't give you hard percentages, but I can give you a ballpark idea. Our state aid, as it relates to special education, is made up of circuit breaker, which was $3.8 million, and then the federal IDEA grant, which is about $1.2 million. So you're looking at about $5 million. And our special ed budget on out-of-district expenses only, between collaboratives and private schools, is about $8 million. So you then add in our in-district salaries for special ed teachers, school psychologists, all those costs, and you can see it's probably covering about 10 to 15% of our special ed expense. Okay?
And that's some of those favorite, or least favorite unfunded mandates that the school department has to deal with.
Yep.
Annually. That's you're all set. Jane.
I'll be nice.
Name and address, please, for those who don't know you.
Oh, I think everybody knows me. Jane Calloway Tripp, 607 Maple Street. 2 questions. First, Lucas. I'm not going to go by all those numbers because I know they're not 100%, but like for this current year, for busing, as of September 16th, we should be collecting in fees $958,500. How much of that goes to the revolving fund?
So it all goes into revolving funds as a collected fee, and then it gets offset to the transportation costs to pay the bus company and the drivers and the fees.
Okay, now those fees, when you put them in that revolving fund, like when you contract for your busing departments, or whoever it is that you contract, that contract is for the to and from school. Does that also incorporate like your sporting bus, those kind of things?
Good question. So the busing fees to transport kids to and from school is collected, and that's, the bus company runs different tiers. They run an elementary run, a high school run, a middle run. So we contract with the buses, but the athletic department has to pay their own fee to get athletes to and from, because that's not part of the educational requirement to transport kids.
It's like an extracurricular.
It's extra, it's baked into the athletic side of the budget. We just happen to use the same bus company because we have a contract with them to transport kids.
Okay. And Jamie, this one's for you. Got a question, and I'm just want to make sure I understand. Regardless of what the numbers say on that sheet, I know the tax levy, and I understand that that gets calculated at 2.5%. And then you go down below and it says potential tax levy. So all of those debt exclusions, when we have them, they get added to our tax levy, and then the following year, the 2.5% is based on the 97 million, correct?
No.
Okay.
The 2.5% is based on the 93.83 million. The debt exclusions you can see, right up here, you can see on a couple of these projects, Keller, Sullivan, Horace Mann, see these little hash marks?
Yeah.
That means that debt is now paid off. And I know this is funny, but it's true. The Board of Assessors then deduct the tax that was raised off the tax rate. You don't see it because it's small, because it's proportioned out around the town. That's why the Tri-County project, I think, was about $125 or $150 per household, right? So it is not based off the 97, but that is how DOR asks us on our sheets, on our recap, on how to calculate the potential tax levy. That's why we don't want to change this revenue sheet. We can do analytics on the side, but our recap is based on that when we report to the Department of Revenue.
Okay, so the 2.5% is based on the normal tax levy, and then based on this, you're just adding the debt exclusions to what was already calculated
Exactly.
to give us a total?
That's correct.
Okay, I think that's all for now. Thank you.
Just to take, Lucas, just to take James' question a little further, only because people in the audience, I want to make sure they understand. The 980, whatever the number is, that you collect for transportation, busing kids to and from school, that 980,000 only goes towards
The
busing
students
them to and from school.
to and from school, and athletics has their own, that's why fees are collected for athletics, because it includes the buses among other fees and expenses related to sports.
Understood. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions on revenue?
Actually, I have a quick question.
Sure.
And this, I think it'll go under school choice, and it's a fairly small thing, but I'm wondering if you can give any color as to, once the override failed, did we see, what percentage increase did we see in enrolled students in public school go to other schools? Can you speak to that at all? I don't know if it
Well,
was
like, I will be on October 1st, I'll have, that's part of our reporting for October 1st, is to provide that information. So I can come back to this group on October 23rd and share more information with that, because I'll have the right number.
I think it's just an interesting, and again, I know it's not a huge number shaker, but it stinks. It just stinks to pay it all. And I know people are moving because they feel like the funding isn't going into their pot, like the public school, so they feel like they have to go elsewhere. So I think it's just interesting to kind of see how that's moving.
I'll make a note to share just an update on that next time we meet.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lucas. Thank you.
I just have a follow-up to that,
Sure,
because I think that's
please.
such a good question coming from the Finance Committee. I do listen to Finance Committee meetings, even though I'm on school committee. I'm not always here, but I'm never here really in person. If Lucas, how, to your point, one of the things that is a real cost driver is turnover, just, hiring, firing. I've done HR consulting. I know it's a big cost driver. And not just for the unemployment rates and insurance, but Lucas, can you speak to, so how many resignations, and we are doing exit interviews, it's not always, because we're unstable or whatnot, we are kind of digging into this a little bit, but since, can you give us some stats on this season's resignations?
I just shared it last night, I'm blanking on the total number. I wanted to say, Mr. Callahan, do you have that number from the document? 58?
Pull it up.
I think, I appreciate you making the comment around, there are resignations that we've received where people say, it's due to just the volatility, the predictability of whether I'm gonna have a job, and then there are other people who leave because they can work closer to home. In the industry, we've seen a lot of movement post-COVID. I think we've talked about that, but we have seen.
And this late in the season, I think was your point last night, was like, we've never seen this amount of people leaving in the fall, when usually it kind of happens in the spring, and
It
I just
does.
think it kind of goes to your point of.
The cycle, I think the cycle for educators to take jobs is to look in late spring, look to be hired or to move, and then close out the year wherever they're working, have the summer, and then enter in the fall in a new district. That's typically what we see. We just have seen that later, I think, that's part of this. Thank you. So 56 total.
Okay. Just wanted to kind of point that out to everyone.
All set, Ruth?
Thank you, yeah.
George?
Just a quick question, Lucas. Can you define the season? I mean, did the
Sure.
season start last May?
So the hiring season in schools is typically at the end of the school year. If someone's working as a teacher in Blackstone and they see a job opening in Bellingham, usually the season is you're still working in Blackstone, but you start interviewing, you get hired, they say, welcome aboard, we'll see you in the fall, and then they close out the year successfully for their district, and then they start the year. I think that's what I meant by season. But
It's not like from September 1st to now, that's
no,
not.
well, we've continued to hire and, respond to open positions and post them and hire throughout, like many other districts, but we've just experienced more recently. I think also the outcome of the override left us with, we were able, in the summer when we received additional funding, thanks to the town council for the additional money in perpetuity, we were able to bring back positions. So that 37 wasn't 37, it ended up being about 24 cuts total so that meant we tried to rehire folks, and some of them came back, some of them didn't. So I think, just to answer the question, I think that's where you were going with that question.
Yeah, I just think there's a cost to losing students, but there's also you could argue an almost greater cost to losing tenured teachers and things like that, because you have to rehire and just.
It just speaks to wanting, I think as a shared group, and as a fellow citizen, I think we all want stability in our budget. I don't think there's anyone who's here, I think everyone's here for that reason, is we're looking to create as much stability. We may disagree on the path or how, but I think at the end of the day, the more stable we are, the better all of us are, and the better our jobs are, I think, as far as that goes, so.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Councilor Chen.
Through you to Lucas. So actually, with 57, that means everybody that got laid off was asked to come back? We had that many jobs open?
No, so people who had a job who weren't, who didn't lose their job as a result of the reduction, these are people who left.
Anyway.
Left anyway, just, they took a job somewhere else. They had a job lined up for the fall, so when we say resignation, we mean someone resigned that we had in the budget, ready for us to work.
Did you fill, I think what he's asking is, did you fill all of those coming back? Because they may have.
Oh, we're
time to
continued, so
fill.
we put out a budget update. I don't have my computer open right now, but we have it online. It's posted from last night's school committee in the packet. We put an HR update every meeting until we get to a place typically around October, where it kind of peters off. But we've been providing an update regularly as part of the school committee update. So we continue to hire and try to replace these positions. That's the total number of resignations through the season, Mr. Conley, through the summer till now. We have hired for those positions. I think the point was the amount of time that we spend hiring over the summer to fully fund or to fully field the team that we can afford based on our budget, our final budget. Does that make sense? I'm trying not to make this too complicated, but.
No, I'm just wondering about, because it sounded like, because we're obviously paying $30,000 a month in unemployment costs. So I'm trying to think, if we offered any of them a job, we could have cut that, because if they refuse us coming back, then we don't have to pay.
So there's two things going on. So you have people who were let off, were reduced, non-renewed, that either took a job somewhere else or did not come back. Those positions are gone. We don't have that position in our budget. The 58 resignations are people who had a budgeted position and voluntarily left. So there's two different things. If the person who was cut wanted to come back, they can absolutely go for a different position if they're licensed for it. So just to be clear, that can happen. I don't have a crosswalk between who was let go and then who took another position that wasn't the one they had.
Even when we're talking 30 to 60,000, it's a big deal right now. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I understand.
All right, as long as people understood that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chandler.
Paul?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Yep,
Mark
yep.
was standing for a few minutes.
Mark Minichelli, 31 Longfellow Drive. Just a quick question to follow up on that. The 56 or 58 resignations, could you help put that into context? What would a normal year's resignation number look like?
25, maybe 25, I'd say. I mean, it's rolling, so you might get 25 through the summer, spring. You might get some as we kick the year off, but,
Thank you. That's it.
30 maybe?
Well, it's double, roughly.
Yep.
Okay, Paul Griffith, I think, had his hand up. Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through the chair, Lucas, I just wanted to clarify, and I think I might understand some of the confusion around trying to, piece together the resignations versus some of the layoffs that we had. These aren't like-for-like positions, right? These are like some of the people that we cut the positions. They're a very different type of role. Either they are, a specialized type of educator, special education educator, or some other kind of specialty system, versus the resignations, which, being party to what you presented last night, there's a lot of support staff that are associated with that, correct?
Yes.
So that's one of the main reasons that we can't just say, oh, well, we have all these extra resignations, we can just plug the holes and offer people jobs, because they're not actually jobs that are even remotely similar to what was cut, correct?
Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure about that, because I think that was a really good question that we had. Earlier, just why don't we just offer everyone who was cut, one of these resignation positions? And the thing is that they don't match up at all. So really, it's not a viable option. We're basically just hit twice, where we have more positions to fill, and we've lost some really great educators. So I appreciate that clarification.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, any other questions on revenue? Okay, expense, Jamie.
So I'm not going to go through the whole sheet here. I know folks have the printouts and they can look at home. We can go up and down however folks want based on questions. But the expense assumptions are very, very easy to understand. They're very basic. To stay within that Prop 2.5 levy of basic general expenses, I just go right down the list, 2.5% on every single personnel and expense line item down the entire budget. And how those numbers trickle out from 26 to 27 through 30, you just see the same thing across the board, 2.5%. We caution people on a couple of things, obviously. Those are not hard numbers. Some departments, like the Board of Health, for example, smaller departments, their expense line item doesn't even go up at all. My expense line item in my budget doesn't go up much at all each year either. So those 2.5% on some of the smaller budgets won't be the final budget. But I would also note those smaller expense budgets don't save you a lot of money. If you took it from the Board of Health from 2.5% to 1%, for example, you don't really net a lot of additional revenue. Obviously, the second piece on here, which is a huge concern, and this will be a very large percentage of my working time throughout the entire year, as well as will be a huge amount of time on our HR departments and our school business administration and finance offices. I did model out a 13% increase in healthcare. We have written about healthcare for many, many years in the budget debates. I'm not going to go into it right now. Our loss runs are incredibly high as an organization. Structurally, they've always been very high. And what is a loss run? So for every dollar in premium, either employee or town paid, or schools, they pay that out of their budget for their employees. But for every dollar in premium, the healthcare company is paying $1.20 in service. So they're losing 20 cents on the dollar. So you just multiply that over and over again, and you can imagine, a health insurance company is losing money. It is a business. Healthcare is a big business. It's the sixth largest economy in the world, okay? It is a huge business in America. And the costs affiliated with it, with less choice in the marketplace, because Tufts and Harvard Pilgrim merged a few years ago, and I think it's called Point 32 now. I still call it Harvard Pilgrim and Tufts, but it's some new name. We're looking at a 13% increase. That's even somewhat of a realistically optimistic number. In my view, we're going to be, we have an IAC meeting next week with our employee unions, all of which attend our meetings very well. I won't go into the IAC dynamics. It's in the budget debate. If people have questions, I can certainly answer that. We put in here a basic 5% increase in Norfolk retirement. That's a standard assumption we use every year. It may be a little higher, maybe a little lower. I give Norfolk County a lot of credit. They do a very, very good job with their projections. They get us information very early. Again, this isn't state law. This isn't something we can change. And our employees contribute into that system. Then there's an assessment on the town and on the schools. This also goes to OPEB, okay? Which I know everybody's favorite acronym, but our OPEB line item and our OPEB trust fund services both school and town employees. And then the other added piece in here is for FY26 is the borrowing model for the Remington Jefferson and Horace Mann projects. At this point, I don't believe that borrowing is the wisest decision and will be ready to put in the budget model in FY26. So if you take that $1.2 million or $1.1 million out of the FY26 assumption, if you take that out and you put that and start it in FY27, which is much more realistic based on interest rates, as well as we have to hire an OPM, we have to fund the actual owner project manager for the project by law. Any project over 1.5 million is required by statute to have what's called an OPM, owner's project manager. Essentially, that's the manager of the project, for lack of bureaucratic acronyms. So in essence, when you get down to the bottom here and you see the $3 million deficit, if you take out the Remington Jefferson remodel for this year and you substitute that with the 1 or 2% state aid assumption, you're looking at a $3 million deficit, which actually is right where we thought we would be when we used the one-time revenue. So based on these assumptions that are in here, we're kind of right on track already, even if you make those couple quick adjustments to what the suggestion was from Ruth Ann and Sue to do the 1 or 2% and then take out the Remington Jefferson. Just to be clear with people, right now, it's not definite. We're still working through the specifics. But my guess this year is we'll request capital funding through the capital program for the OPM for Remington for that project. We will hire that person because that gives us, as you know better than anybody, that gives us additional bandwidth, which is really, really important. We hired the OPM recently for the police station, and from my standpoint, it's not out of sight, out of mind, but it kind of is for a little bit of time because the OPM really runs that project. So those are the only 4 assumptions that are used in the expense sheet. Like I said earlier, none of our departments have done full deep dives into their cost expenses into their budgets for this year, but we'll have those later in December. Happy to answer any questions. Oh, the major issues not in here. How could I forget? You're staring at me going, why'd you stop?
When are you going to address it?
So you're at a $3 million deficit, even using the assumptions that Ruth Ann and Sue were using, and we were just talking about Remington Jefferson and the remodel, which would be most likely start in FY27. What this model does not account for: collective bargaining among the biggest unions in Franklin. I put a note here for all of us
Just run through,
to have
just
some
so people
caution.
understand which ones are.
Sure. That is the FEA teachers, that is police patrol, police sergeants, custodians, librarians, fire department, maintenance and trades, and help me out, somebody in the back if I forgot one. DPW, Public Works, custodians. I probably said them all twice now. So I think it's 8 or 9 unions. They are all up with expiring contracts at the end of June. This model does not accommodate for that, other than obviously the 2.5% that we've put across the personnel line item gets there. But obviously with the deficit, there's a lot of conversations we're going to have in town regarding what exactly our strategy is collectively going into that. I think everybody's very familiar with my COLA equity concept, not just because it's fair and equitable for all of our municipal and school units, which is very important, but also you don't have unions leapfrogging each other. Oh, now I want 4, I want 5, let's go higher, I want this, I want that. And then you get into a system which is just completely uncontrolled costs. And that's when you lay off positions. That's when positions get reduced. So if we want to keep the staffing models that we're at, both in the school department, police department, the fire department, the DPW to deliver the services and safety, et cetera, that we want, we have to be very cognizant that if we elevate this issue, you can get into a situation where you have to now cover those cost increases with redundancies. The second issue in here that is not accommodated for are the savings or cost analysis relative to redistricting. And I know Lucas is giving updates at the school committee. He'd be happy to answer your questions, I'm sure, with where they're at. Obviously, employee health care is a huge issue that has already been modeled out there, but we don't have any final numbers. And by the way, we never usually have final numbers from the IAC until March. And people ask me all the time, why do you wait so late? Because when you're a healthcare company and you're losing money on the customer, which is us, we try everything we can to make sure that when you go out to get a contract on healthcare, you want it to be the last several months where loss runs are below 100%. Because then the healthcare insurance company is taking a flyer on us for the next year, saying, hey, you know, their trends this year are headed in the right direction. Maybe they'll be at 90% of loss runs, and therefore for every premium we pay out, the healthcare company makes 10 cents on the dollar, right? And usually over a series of 5 or 10 years or 20, you know, those numbers kind of generally equal themselves out. But it ebbs and flows based on how much we consume healthcare services. And the last piece I added in here was this does not accommodate for inflation. That is hugely impacted, obviously, the facilities and public works departments probably as much as anyone, and certainly the schools as well, with some of their expense line items. We know that 88% of the school budget is salaries and benefits, so for that extra 10 or 12%, I think inflation probably is hitting them on some supplies, particularly, and that's also some of the reasons why fees are going up for the schools, and why the council on their goals, which will be presented next week in the next couple months, will present our fee updates to make sure that we're staying on top and we're recouping the money that we're providing for service. But the reason why I added this here is the costs are not going down. Inflation has certainly cooled. We all know what the Fed Reserve is up to possibly within the next week, that maybe even 1/4% interest rate cut may come, which will not change the dynamics significantly on our borrowing, which is why I'm also concerned about Rem Jeff right now in terms of going out and blocking off way too much interest in the budget. But inflation, the costs aren't coming down, and I think, you know, Brutus and Mike, some of the other department heads, certainly also the fire chief, and many others can speak to how the costs have just gone through the roof, and they're just not coming down. So there's no relief in this budget is really, at the end of the day, what the point is. There's no real relief where we can say, gosh, fuel has come down, costs of fencing has come down, electricity has come down. All those numbers, as we all are feeling at home in our own households, you know, that is a big concern as we go through the budget this year. And that's another reason why, unfortunately, to have a very solvent and accurate budget going into FY26, you know, that's why we wait until really February, March, even early April, at really putting those numbers together so we know, you know, we're not going to get caught blindsided. So happy to answer any questions, obviously, to that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jim. Lucas, anything? Mr. McNeil?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you. Well, first of all, Jamie, thank you very much for all the preparation you did for tonight, and thank you, Lucas, as well, and your respective teams. I know it's been a theme of the past few months, but in terms of the discussion with Lucas, just taking a look at, you know, the Franklin Public Schools item number 300. So, you know, hypothetically, if these numbers over the next 5 years bear out or something similar to them, and we remain on this trend, what's that implication for the schools?
I think what Jamie mentioned is, I think we're in a situation where we're trying to account for what we know already as a ceiling, I mean, a floor of a deficit we're already in. So what we will do is we'll continue to model out and see that we'll have to continue to make reductions if we don't come up with other ways to fund the budget. And what we're trying to avoid through all this is hopefully get to a place through this process where we can start to, stability is like in my mind, the word that I've been using a lot. You know, I did mention in my opening remarks around the steps we've taken as a district to right-size fit our district, and that helps us create solvency and sustainability as we move forward in our budget. But it will not keep up with the costs associated either. So I think we have to do our work and put that out transparently of where we land as we rebuild and figure out what we need and what we're carrying forth and what we're not, what are we prioritizing, but ultimately, you know, as you hear through the site, this whole budget season and through as we provide updates, it's just where are we at? And I think, I can't speak specifically to numbers tonight, and I wasn't prepared to, or that was an expectation, but the model makes it pretty clear. We're already starting at a deficit, and we need to work together to figure out how we're gonna move out of it. Because it will have impacts, reductions, cuts, all those things. I don't say that as a scare tactic or a threat, but I think there's a reality to this, and that's why we're meeting now.
Yeah. And to kind of piggyback a little bit on what Lucas just said, you know, people can, you know, I would refrain from people, they can certainly go on and get the numbers and try to create their own numbers, but, you know, just conceptually, if some of those other expense line items were not going up 2.5%, there might be a little savings there. You may reallocate those other places. Also, we don't have to assume a 2.5% is what exactly is in the personnel line items. I think, you know, over the last several years, I know every district, and it's in all these articles about some of the challenges facing schools and towns. I think there was a post-pandemic anxiety around a lot of issues about how hard people worked, how committed people were, you know, what certain people did for the pandemic versus others. And I know a lot of my colleagues and managers, I know a lot of Lucas's colleagues and superintendents saw that. But, you know, now that the ARPA and ESSER money has dried up, now that we are seeing these huge increases in inflation, you know, I think people can kind of think it through before the next October meeting, right? You know, we're probably going to have to creatively look at that deficit. If you did 2% across the board, just as an example, in the personnel line item, if you did 2%, that deficit would shrink a little bit, right? So those are hard conversations, and those are difficult decisions, but I'm just illustrating that I'm just putting out to stay within the levy in those assumptions. I'm just lining up the numbers. But if we did a 2% or 1.5%, for those line items, then obviously that would reduce the $3 million deficit on the other end of the expense sheet. So I think what this is generated to do is to give everybody some food for thought for a month and think through some concepts as the group thinks to the next month and a half, and then we just continue to evolve. Just to illustrate, the town has not actively started collective bargaining yet. We probably wouldn't for many, many months. So some of these decisions are far off, and we'll certainly walk the community through them as we have information to provide.
Thank you. Then sticking on the 300, the schools line item, Jamie, would you mind just for the application of the community, the 77.47 million number, just what goes into that? Like how do we get to that number this year as our base for these projections?
I believe that was the base number from the approved budget for this fiscal year. And then we take an FY26 and add 2.5, and then add 2.5 on that all the way through FY30. So at least, you know, look, if that school line item goes up 3.5%, then you've got to make up that percent, which is a very large number, by the way. The Board of Health's budget at 300,000 or whatever, 400,000, animal control at 104,000 is the department. You know, 1% to that is pennies, right? But when you're talking 1 or 1.5% on the school base of 77 million, that's a substantial number. But if you make an assumption of 3.5% for the school base budget, then you've got to decrease other areas throughout the budget. And I think with the retirement, the benefits, and some of the other cost drivers with inflation, that's a very, very challenging endeavor to do. And so just for discussion purposes, again, the second week after Labor Day, this is months before we've normally talked about this at all, this will hopefully get some people thinking about, you know, what the future beholds and some of the challenges we have in the budget.
Lucas, is there something to add on?
No. Do you have any? No.
Thank you. And then just one more. I know we had talked about grants and how there are no grants factored into this. But Jamie, you were talking about the Remington Jefferson Horseman remodels. Are there maybe some potential grants out there, possibly MSBA or something like that, that we could look into to help out with those?
We could, I mean, I think the MSBA, the chair can speak to this as eloquently as anybody. I don't think this project would be fast-tracked at all. We'd be waiting a real long time. And I think we're all familiar with the issues at Remington Jefferson. By the way, huge shout out to the DBW and the custodians the fields looked amazing when I was out there a few weeks ago. The building looked fantastic inside, but there have been issues with mold. There has been some issues with the roof. Both of those are tied together. It's a very woody site, so it doesn't dry out easy. And you're at a 30-year level with RJ. The project, if you hired the OPM, just to illustrate, Mr. McNeil, if you hired the OPM next year, then you put the borrowing out in 27, you get the money in that fiscal year, you're talking about FY28, FY27, FY28 is when you're actually doing the work. So we're still 3 years out from doing, the actual physical work to do the renovations. I think that on our capital list, that's the #1 project that we have to do. It just needs it very bad. And we have talked and met with Mike about, avoiding disruption in the classrooms. I mean, some of the good news is a lot of the issues are boilers, mechanicals, the roof, the fire alarms, stuff on the exterior. So, there's really ways to not have a significant disruption to the school year while that contractor is going on. But MSBA would be a high lift, and I think it would be.
You're looking at a project like this with MSBA, you'd be between 5 and 7 years out.
And maybe 25%, I don't even know if it would be eligible.
The number would be.
Very low.
The percentage. Our other schools that we've done have been, 56, 58 cents on a dollar. This project would probably be in the low 20s. But just getting on the list, and this would not be a fast-tracked project. You could be on the list for 5 to 7 years before they even talk about it.
And the town of Lexington is talking about like a $600 million school.
$600 million.
The MSBA has already also said, this year was the 20th anniversary of the MSBA, by the way, where the legislature dedicated a penny in the sales tax in '04 to this, and the MSBA has been making pleas, I think maybe you've heard some of them up on the hill, like they've been making pleas to, I think, the legislature and others saying we are not financially solvent ourselves to carry the weight of these projects in the future, especially when you're looking at Whittier Tech at $444 million, Lexington's up at a 500, 600 plus million project. And just so folks know too, the Chapter 70 formula is an aggregate wealth model. So districts that are poorer, that have less means to be able to pay, get a higher percentage of Chapter 78. A very similar situation, not exact, but a similar situation works with MSBA. So MSBA is likely to tell Franklin, pay for it yourself.
Yeah, just to jump on Jamie's point, you look at Lexington, and they're looking at a $580 million high school. We built ours for 104.
Say that a little louder.
104 compared to 580, 7, 8 years later. We
That's
were
a lot
at
of
the right place at the right time. And we were at the right place at the right time for Remington Jefferson, for Keller Sullivan, for Horace Mann, for the senior center, for the fire department. We've just been very, very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. And with MSBA, we were with all of our schools, all of our community schools.
Which is why we want to reinvest in the buildings that we're going to be utilizing to make sure, and I think that's why it's part of the plan, is to do that.
Absolutely. And I don't think we can wait 5 to 7 years to deal with Remington Jefferson. We need to deal with that before. Sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you both for the clarification.
Thank you, Dave. George?
Just a quick question. Does the lack of construction affect the redistricting issues? No?
No, I'm sorry, no.
I actually did my head nod.
Oh, okay.
He got you. We're
The
good.
question about, okay, no.
Any other questions from the committee? Council Chambers?
Is this the last chance to ask questions? Are we ending? Are we getting close to the end?
We're getting close to the end, but you're
I
okay.
have questions.
You'll get it.
Because it's not
Mark,
exactly.
you're on your...
Mark Minichelli, 31 Longfellow Drive. I realize that it's at the beginning stages and it's sketch only at this point, but I just wanted to put in a little plug for the Sustainability Director. So I'm hoping that by the time we get to the end of this, at least we can perhaps have some serious discussions about the possibilities of adding that role. I sent a report out to the town council as well as Jamie. Some studies that a few of us have done looking at how sustainability directors have impacted, positively impacted several of the area towns and municipalities who have added this role. It primarily does two things. It looks for internal capital projects and opportunities to bring cost savings to the town through green capital projects. And secondly, with a more focused effort on identifying grant money. And I know you can't count on grant money, but it is real dollars that could be brought in. We believe there's enough evidence by the other communities that have added these types of roles that I think it would make financial sense to do it within Franklin's budget. And I don't know what year it makes sense to do that. I think sooner, in my mind, sooner means more grant money available than later. So I hope we can have a more serious discussion about that before we're finished. Thank you.
Okay, Mark, thank you. Anyone else in council chambers? Come on up, Max. Just, you're next.
My name is Maxwell Marangelo. I live at 127 Central Park Terrace. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, the real reason we need an override. And it's not something that either One Franklin or their opponents have actually brought into the limelight during the election due to the stigma around the issue. So I'm a proud product of our town's special education system. 20 years ago, 12.4% of the students in the public school system identified as having a disability. Today, that number has almost doubled to 20.5%. Do you know that the biggest single cost driver for the override this year was a $2.2 million increase in special education costs? 17% of the entire town's budget goes to special education. That's 30% of the school budget and 8% more than the state average. However, in 2008, the school district only spent 22% of its budget on special education. Special education costs have gone up an average of 7% since 2008, according to DESE data, rather than the 2.5% projected by the town administration. Special education is required by law to provide people like me a proper education. I'm grateful for it. I encourage the town administrator and the superintendent to avoid painting a budget picture that is too good to be true. I urge them both to separate out special education costs in their respective budget models and to ensure that the historical 7% increase in special education and transportation costs are properly projected going forward. We need to have an honest conversation about special education costs. This way, we can better plan for the future and ensure that everyone has access to a quality education. If you want access to my data, you can find it at the URL forwardcast.votemax.us. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Please, name and address, please.
Celia Courtwright, 213 Peck Street. Just one item on the expense side that I'm just kind of curious about, mostly because it doesn't show an increase, and that's the retired teacher health insurance, and there's no forecasted increase with it. I'm just curious why.
That's because folks who are retired, some of those folks unfortunately have passed along and are deceased. And if you look at the historical trend, I think the town, I don't know how long, I think it was probably 15 or 20 years ago, the town took on that line item. It has slowly decreased over the years.
That answer your question? Is there anyone else in council chambers that has a question on expenses? Anyone out there in Zoom land? Councilor Chairman.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, I know a lot of people are here tonight and listening at home. and they want to hear a little bit about the override. And I appreciate the comments by the citizen about the sustainability coordinator, but I personally believe if Mr. Helen hired a six-figure job like that right now, it would single-handedly tank the override, because people would just not be able to, because I truly believe that the department heads could do whatever that person is gonna do, or give off the work to somebody. We have that many people still left here. So I need people to understand that. We can't just go around hiring $100,000 a year jobs, another 20 in benefits. That's just my opinion, and I think people, if they really are serious about an override, they need to say no. We can't hire any more of that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Chandler. Was there another hand up? This one. Okay, Jamie, anything to add?
Nope.
Lucas, anything to add?
No, I took good notes on some of the comments, questions. I know Jamie did as well, and we'll just be prepared as we keep moving through this to keep
Roseanne,
coming
did you
back.
have a comment or question?
Yeah, I just, before we go, because I know we're not going to meet for another month. The December 20, I'll go back to like my original question, because it looks like, so we're looking for operating budgets to be submitted by December 20th. I know that the schools especially need that time, because we are in the process of redistricting and we need to quantify what that could do to our operating budget. I suspect it's less than $1 million. I just don't think it's going to be what we had hoped, and maybe it'll be more municipal savings, and that works out to be a better allocation, and there's nuance to that. But my biggest concern is, so I know a lot about overrides now, and I know that when it is for the whole town, when I went out and I met with Chief Lynch and I met with Chief McLaughlin and I met with the unions and I met with the DPW and whatnot, I had written up what I thought they needed, the 3 paramedics that, Chief McLaughlin was talking about, the, police relying on capital funds for safety equipment and potentially losing clinicians because the grant was temporary, things like that. So I think it's critical that the school's not, I'm obviously, I've got my school committee hat on. I don't think that the people of Franklin want to see more cuts to schools. I do believe there's an appetite for an override. Clearly, there's an appetite for an override, but I'm very concerned about leaving this meeting without some sort of action items or deliverables for next meeting. And one of the things that I was hoping to come to today and talk about and ask for was, if we were to fund the school budget at level service, if we were to give the schools what they need for what Lucas believes is an adequate budget, and I know that number is in the works, but I think that we could sort of have an idea, and even if we go off just this, can we create a hypothetical so that we really can talk about what the community is going to respond to? Sort of like what you did with the triage of the 4, kind of, these are the tiers, this is what would be next. I think, as ugly as that would look, but it's just an exercise. It's like, we have to start somewhere, so let's just pretend we're gonna fund the budget level for the schools and not cut anything else. That would annihilate the municipal budget. So obviously we're not gonna do that either. So, but can we at least put it up there? I know it's an uncomfortable conversation, but Lucas does it all the time. It's like people are running around the schools in June like, my department's getting slayed, it's like, but then it does or it doesn't, and it depends. But I mean, it's something I think we need. And I don't wanna wait till December 20th to start that exercise. Because then it's like, I'm a little concerned about this timeline. Like, I think we need to start agreeing that unless there's some new growth miracle happening, like, we do need the override. I'd love to make a motion to at least vote that we're committed to getting to the number, but that we agree that nothing much has changed since last year. I mean, the only thing that's changing is we're redistricting, and it's not gonna give us what we need, yeah.
You want to start, Jamie, and then I'll
Go for it.
piggyback? Oh,
Yeah,
go
yeah.
ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think, if I understand Ruth Ann correctly, the hard part of that is, from a vote, I think Councilor Chairman tipped on this a little bit. From a voter standpoint, if you don't have 100% real numbers, like the cherry sheet on state aid, it's hard to move all the needles around. You can definitely take good guesses. Maybe what you're getting at, if I'm reading this clearly, is, are you looking for what do we need as a community to continue to move forward? What is the cost that we
No, I
need
wanna
for
see
the
what's
school
at
department?
stake.
What do we need from police and fire? Like,
I want to see, even if we used, like, let's just use the budgets last year. Like, schools are very fluid, especially this year. You know, the class sizes ebb and they flow, and teachers have to move around and things like that. Other departments, because I do attend town council meetings, feel a little bit more stable. You know, there are costs that change and they ebb and swell. But even if we used, for example, like, you know, what you were using last year, I just want to start to have the conversation of, guys, there's a lot at stake here if we don't come together and unify as a town. And I think that's an exercise worth beginning to do, so that when we do get the numbers, we're ready to roll. Like, we're like, okay, we have an idea. It's almost like an iteration.
Can I say it in another way? Just plain and simple, if we give the schools $6 million more, if they need $6 more million to be at level service, and we just take the $6 million out of the municipal budget, where would that $6 million live?
Yeah, it'll look
You're looking for the
atrocious.
hard, like, okay,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
2 less police officers, you want to know, if we had to do that, what would be the absolute worst case scenario?
Yeah, because
No
yeah.
override, take the $6 million, give it to the schools, what would the municipal?
Right, and don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating for that. I
Right.
just think that Lucas does that exercise in
That's a
such
good
detail. And we, I know you've got more departments, like, to juggle with different nuances and department heads, kind of like what Lucas has to do with each principal. But I think it's important. I see Chief Lynch up, so I want to allow, you know, I don't know,
Well,
take over his.
Before I go to Chief.
Okay. Yeah, what do you?
My thought process with this, from the very beginning, was to start at ground zero,
Yeah.
which we've done tonight. And there have been many questions that have come up tonight, some of which are going to be brought back to us with answers on October 23rd. I believe we need to continue to move that way and not jump to here. I think that's a mistake. I truly do. I think it's important for the community to watch us build it from the beginning, which is what I'm hoping to do with the Joint Budget Subcommittee over the next few months. I'm not saying that October 23rd, we're not going to meet again till December.
Right, but what are we going to talk about? Right.
We're
Yeah.
going to talk about things that we asked questions about tonight.
Yeah.
We can continue to have, I don't think there's anybody sitting here that doesn't think we're going to be facing another override vote next year.
Right.
Truly, I don't believe there's anyone here that doesn't feel that way. But how do we get there? And let's get there very smartly by starting at the beginning and building to that. And it's unfortunate that, for whatever the reason, the governor's going to throw her budget, the end of January, beginning of February. That's when it always comes. Doesn't mean we can't have override conversations prior to that. Because one of the things I was going to close tonight's meeting with was, okay, we're starting. Now it's up to you folks out here that are listening to spread the word to not just the people in this room, but to everybody out there, what's going on and why we're looking, why we're in the situation we are, as you are learning this moving forward. And we need them to come to the next meeting and them to understand or tune in. But we need to start from the beginning, because trust is so important to get an override passed. The community needs to trust what's coming out of the town council's mouth, what's coming out of the school committee's mouth, what's coming out of the finance committee's mouth. By working together to get us there, I think it sends one message from the three fiscal bodies that the town has, which are sitting here this evening. So I understand what you're saying, Ruth Ann, and I don't disagree. You've heard me say it, and I've said it publicly, and I continue to do. I know we need an override. What is that number? I don't know what that number is, but I know we're going to need it, because I know we're $3 million in the hole. And you just heard conversation from Jamie that we're just putting 2.5% inflation. Look at all the different health insurance. Look at all the things we're looking at. These are things that are going to get closer to the actual number over the next few months. And as we get closer to that number, we're going to be much closer to being able to circle in on what that right override number is.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Sorry for my
No,
rant.
I appreciate it. A couple of examples. These are just examples, I think, that go to Ruth Ann's point and also yours. I'm going to need at least September and October and November to meet with the IAC to look at our healthcare options.
Yeah.
This is a whole new year. What we're doing now, we're not doing. What we're going to do for FY26 is a major decision. I mean, there's a plausibility that the most of the new tax levy capacity goes just to healthcare. So the employee units, including the teachers who are an active participant, and I give a huge shout out to Joe Corey, amazing representative. I never want him to retire. I know he does, but I don't want him because I always want him on the IC. He's such a great member. Like, that is a big driving force before we can really go forward and say, well, what is an override number? And then what is the override for? What services, right? We heard Max's, eloquent remarks a minute ago. Is that the right strategy? Is that the right way to go? I don't know that decision. COLA equity. If I could get the 8 unions, school and unions, to agree earlier on at least the COLA, that would be a huge win. An analogy I've made is when Amy and I worked in the legislature during the bad budget years, the governor, House, and Senate would come out in February with a local aid resolution to give certainty to local cities and towns on local aid. The COLA and health insurance right there are like 2 of your biggest issues to solve, and you ain't solving those anytime soon. So looking up and down the chart, I would look out and say, I think the superintendent and I need the fall to go through Thanksgiving to try to do work on these things. Our departments and our principals also probably need a few months to get with their teams to talk about what they're seeing in their budgets and what they're going to, what they want or don't want, or what their contractual obligations are. I just use those as a few examples. And then the tax rate in December really does kind of set us free. It's a point in time that's a little odd, but for us in municipal service, once you set the tax rate, you kind of move on, and it kind of expedites things into FY26. The last thing I'll just say really quickly, Mr. Chairman, is public forums. The fall is an excellent time for either this committee or the school committee or the council or everybody. People have to, I believe, listen to the public and hear their opinions about what went right, what went wrong, what happened. Did the right services get restored? What are the vision moving forward? Are the priorities AP restoration? Are the priorities theater? These are questions I'm not going to answer, and I don't have the information to answer them. But I think we had one public forum because of the very condensed time frame. We had one at the high school, but I think post-override, I think a lot of you, while we're doing all the work internally, you guys got to get out there, outside this door, out into the streets, out into neighborhoods, talking to people on their streets. What was their perception of all this? What was their input? What did they want to see? It's not just about for an override or not, but what services do they want? Is roads a big issue? I heard a lot of people voted for the override just because of the public infrastructure clause in there, because I was saying to them, there is a chance that if it passes on the 40%, we can get some public infrastructure money in there. And a bunch of people said to me, you know what, if your goal is to get to this number, there it is. So those are some things for the committee to think about.
Chief?
Thank you.
Sorry.
All right, so, Mr. Chairman, between you and Jamie, you kind of stole a lot of my thunder there. Like, slow down, all right? Because we can't boondoggle this a second time. It has to be done correctly, and those are huge. Insurance is huge. It's a huge number that he doesn't know yet exactly what it's going to be, or the COLA. We have to go into collective bargaining with every single unit in town. Now, I'm just going to state it. I'll bet my house on it, and I think most of the other department managers that have unions in their departments will agree. No one in the municipal side is going to sign a contract until after the teachers settle. I can guarantee that right now. So if they're not already starting at some point, 'cause I'm already looking at potentially starting, and I know Jamie would like to as well, but there's really not a real reason to do it until after that's done. There's no way that they're going to end up signing a contract. And if we don't know what the COLA is going to be, then you have no idea what the number might end up being in total to make sure that everything is done the way that everybody would like to, that everybody has what they need as everybody has said. I'm just throwing it out there because I'm telling you that's the case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Name and address, please.
Jenna Cohen, 14 Elm Street. I have had other things, but I just have a quick clarifying question. Can you clarify why all of the other departments need to wait until after the teachers settle? Just, it's an ignorance, so.
Well, I'll explain it because it's one of those things that I don't think's really been explained in full. So this exact group met 3 years ago, or prior to the 23, 24, 25 collective bargaining. And at that time, there was an unwritten but definitely agreed upon thing amongst all the groups that the best the town could do when it came to collective bargaining on the COLA was 2.5% each year for 3 years. Jamie was bargaining with all of the municipal unions. He had 3 of the unions, including the fire, which would have been the first time they had gone to arbitration in years, ready to sign on a Wednesday night. And the Tuesday before, that Wednesday that he was bringing them before the council, the school committee, the superintendent, Sarah Ahern at the time, agreed and gave the teachers a 4, 4, and 4. Which immediately, so I'm sitting here telling my union members, when Jamie said to them at the beginning of the negotiations, 6 months, like in January, before the end of the contract would be in June, that he is telling the truth, that the best we can do is 2.5%, and everybody's on board for 2.5%. Because that was the best we could do. And basically pulled the rug out from under him. I went to them again and I said, listen, he did not lie. I'm telling you right now, but we had to start all over again. And we had to do all this different stuff, including these ARPA stipends and things like that, which that money was eventually, I believe, supposed to be used for other things like infrastructure on roads and et cetera. But that is the reason that no one's going to sign a contract, prior to the teachers signing a contract.
So I think the whole 4, 4, and 4 situation has been talked about and explained many times over in the override. Well, I'm not sorry, Mr. Chairman, that I asked the question because I think people are continuing to educate themselves. And it underlines the need to something you spoke to, which is building back trust. Building back trust in all of you, building back trust in you, maintaining trust in you, and engaging the community in thoughtful conversation to move forward. So there were reasons that the 444 were put forward and agreed upon. That I'm not going to go back and revisit that, but there was reason for that. I appreciate the position that it put all of you in, and that wasn't fair, and it undermined trust. So we have some rebuilding to do, a lot of it. I do think that what you and Ruth Ann are talking about are pretty much the same thing as far as starting from the beginning and understanding what happens if there's level service funding for the schools, what that does as a town, not schools versus municipality, but as a town. So I would encourage us to engage in the build-up conversation, appreciate what all of the departments need and want, appreciating that there is unknown, work in progress numbers that we're not going to have as early as we can have that conversation. But that's the conversation that we do need to have now, because part of the challenge with the override commitments for the members of this town were lack of clarity of where it was going to go, that it was only to the schools, and that it was not necessarily going to be in perpetuity. So if we can have a town conversation as opposed to a schools versus municipality conversation, we'll all be better off. In order to do that, I'm going to echo, Jamie, what you just said. The town council, the school committee, needs to get up from behind that desk and come into the community to engage in conversation. You have many people here who are willing to partner with you to do that, myself included. And I raised my hand last time, and I'll do it again. Yes, there needs to be community involvement. Yes, grassroots matters, but so does town leadership. It's part of your job. It's why you're elected. So please engage us thoughtfully, meaningfully, genuinely, educate and bring us along. The override is needed. How we do it, for what services, we can figure that out together. I believe that. You have people with very different perspectives in this room, all who want best for this town. But it comes with leadership. So I just ask that all of you do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
One more thing. I promise this is
Sure.
I shouldn't say a softball,
Go ahead.
but it's an ask. When we reconvene next time, and you'd be the expert on this, Jamie, I know. And there's people within the One Franklin community sort of working on it that can collaborate with you, some pretty smart minds. One of the things that we want to do this time around is a line item in the override. We would like to have a fund. Throw a number out there, $250,000, something. For the whole town, it ends up like, $10, $15 a year for a resident or something. And that fund, and we do have like a data analytics team that can kind of dig in, would be used to be a bit more aggressive on tax subsidies. So I don't know, and we want to make it as simple as possible. It's based on your tax return income, especially fixed, and being a homeowner. It was one of the objections that we heard a lot, and we do have census information. We know we can kind of identify the need, and I believe it's not as vast as people sort of made it out to be. I think we can maybe help out a little bit, and so I just don't know what the legal ramifications are of that. Like, would we call it a subsidy? Would we call it an exemption? Becomes with a lot more legal, like, lease. So I know it's challenging, but I know towns do it. So it would just get rid of that objection if we could just, hey, if you're on fixed income, you own a home in Franklin, and you make under $40,000 a year, or whatever the number is that we sort of can, pull the residents, then you get, $500 off your tax bill. Just show it, validate your tax return, show us your address, and you qualify. And I don't think that number is huge. We've dug into it a little bit, and I think it's a possibility. It could take that objection off the table, and we could just be talking to like, hey, my house I bought in 2020 for $469. It appraised last month for $770.
Right.
So,
Well,
people have to
it's
contribute.
good for equity.
Yeah, that's because,
And our housing shortage in Massachusetts are driving up prices. I mean,
True.
I think that's all pretty well known that we have one of the lowest vacancy rates in the country.
Yeah.
When I saw Secretary Augustus last month, it was 1.3% vacancy rate. That's microscopic. But beyond that, I think Mr. Chairman, I'd have to take offline and have a separate meeting to fully understand exactly what the concepts are here. I think to Jenna's point earlier, and I think one of the things that the two-way street has to have is we're at these meetings, we're educating people, I've done these presentations for 3 fiscal years, this is now my 4th, very intense, and we have to sacrifice somewhere to make sure we're digesting some of the information that's being said. One of those has been, we've promoted many times the citizen discounts, community assistance program. The town of Franklin is going to, by the way, just as a teaser, the HERO Act that was passed by the legislature has another tax abatement in there. We're going to put that on the agenda in October. We'll be the first town in Massachusetts to accept that from the HERO Act. We have accepted almost every other state offered abatement on the books. So I'd have to get a little more information. If you could provide an example of where another community has a fund that subsidizes property tax breaks, I'd love to find out where that is. I have gotten some emails from people about Arlington. We've already done all those senior exemptions. We've literally done everything already. We are way ahead of Arlington on this stuff. I just have to know more information exactly what you're talking about, because you can't really just give a property tax break.
Right.
And the tax rate hearings in November or December are not tax breaks. It's shifting burden of taxes from one group to another. I will make a mention that the Municipal Empowerment Act, which all of you voted to support, has a senior property tax exemption provision in there. So your advocacy to Representative Roy and Senator Roush to get that bill done, not next year, like this session, there's no excuse why that bill is not getting done. All those provisions in there matter. That bill does have a senior property tax exemption provision in it, which we would love to accept. But I need to know a little bit more information. And just as a side, I know the DPW manages most of our community assistance program work. They do a great job. But to administer the paperwork affiliated with provide your tax returns and doing all that, you're going to end up having a staff cost that comes with that. You're probably going to need a dedicated part-time position.
We thought about that too, yeah.
Or something else. You know, if somewhere we'll have to figure out who's going to do that work to make that rebate happen. Could be the assessors, could be the treasurer, but those are just some logistics to kind of think
We
about.
can have a discussion offline.
Yeah, it's just, it's really popular, like, you know.
If you can do it.
Yeah, not a problem. Any other committee member have a question or comment? Anyone in the audience? Anyone out there in Zoom land? Well, I think this was the...
Kobe just put his hand up.
Kobe put his hand up. Okay, Kobe.
Sorry, I'll keep it quick. I couldn't go a full meeting without hearing my voice. I just wanted to, I think that, yes, I'm excited to be back. I was agreeing with everything that was going. My reason for not jumping in was because I appreciated the direction. I appreciated a lot of the comments and questions that came forth. And I really, for what it's worth, wanted to give a particular shout out to Ruth Ann's comments all night. I think the path to success here are really the three buckets that I heard from her. Clear and consistent data. Sorry, are you able to hear me?
It's a struggle. We can, but it's a struggle. Keep going, Cole.
Three main things: clear and consistent data. Early understanding of what's at stake on the municipal side. We don't need the full numbers to still understand what expenses would go or start to go if needed, what sort of buckets. We started to put this together as we looked post override to add to the budget. And the third being that final, what are all our options for equity? And the sort of overall thing of this is a whole bunch that we still have to talk about, and we shouldn't take too long. But yeah, appreciate getting this conversation started right now, and excited to work from here.
Thank you, Kobe. Okay, as I started to say, I think tonight was a very good beginning. I apologize, it's a little longer than I had hoped for, but I think there was a lot of good information brought forward. We have some information, some questions that we'll get answers to for October 23rd. And as I stated at the October 23rd meeting, as we progress through that meeting, we'll decide when the next meeting we will need to have to continue to move the process forward. And I think we are on the same page.
Yes.
Getting there a little differently, that's all. So, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Non-debatable, all those in